What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino and Johnnie Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome to episode 15 of CineD Focus Check podcast. Hi, Johnnie.
Hi, Nino.
Hi, Graham.
Hi, Graham.
Hi, Nino. Hi, Johnnie.
Well, live from LA. We're here in Austria. It's very late for you, Graham. And actually, let's dive right in. You just attended the two announcement events for CineD for the C400 in Burbank, and I think for the GH7, which was also an event in Burbank, right?
Yeah, on the second one, though, the Panasonic was at the Warner Brothers lot, which is where the rest of Cine Gear will be. The Canon one was at the Canon Burbank offices.
Very cool. So
15 minutes drive, no? It's very close to each other.
It's like next
Super
door.
close. Yeah, but once you park at Warner Brothers, then you walk another 15 minutes. So give or take 15.
So It was a very busy day last night.
It was a very, very busy day and night. I mean, if Graham and me look a little bit less fresh than normal, it's really because, it was just, first of all, it was very interesting. It was very energizing to see such cameras, and maybe they're completely different segments, but doesn't matter. I mean, it's nice to see Canon coming up after such a long time. We're going to talk about this in a second, with a new camera in the cinema line in a very competitive price Canon-wise, and then also see Panasonic coming with a new GH camera that has so many new benefits, features. But we're gonna dive right into this. So which camera first?
Yeah, let's start with this C400, then we go to the GH7, then we go to the other Canon announcements, and then we go to the rest. So just
I
people
thought you
know
said
what
then
to
we're going to sleep. I want
you will. We'll see.
Also, Graham.
It's nearly 1 a.m. here, California time. So CineD merch idea, maybe pajamas.
Embrace the hustle,
Actually, a pajama with a CineD logo, that should be our next thing.
So let's start with the C400. Like you said, it's the first cinema line camera from Canon, I think, since the R5C in 22.
And even longer time since the kind of this
the bigger one.
Exactly.
What was the last one? The C300 Mark III, I think, was after the C500 Mark II, right?
Yeah.
We're not
exactly
sure
in that order.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Graham, did you get an answer from Canon why it took them so long to come up with a camera?
That seemed like a tricky out of the gate question. It's like, what's been going on? But look, I mean, if you look at the C70, if you look at the R5C, there has been stuff happening on the cinema side for Canon. What hasn't been happening is what you alluded to, something like the C500 Mark II or something like the C300 Mark III. And, at risk of burying the lead, $8,000 is the price point for the C400. And the Canon team is saying it's going to fit right between the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. Time will tell if the C400 sort of, stifles at least one of those two sides, especially because it's a 6K full frame sensor. So does that mean it's going to kind of, take a little bit of the shine out of the C500 Mark II, or is it going to take a little bit of shine out of the C300 Mark III, or is it going to be its own thing living right in the middle? We don't know.
We're going to talk about the specifications in a second, but you as a Canon user, heavy user, were you impressed with what you saw?
Yeah, so, I own 7 Canon bodies at this point. Team Canon for a long time now, I think is safe to say. And yeah, I was really impressed. It also felt like, the sort of Canon launch event of old times was back, like pre-pandemic times. There was a great energy. And, we've talked a lot about this on the site as it relates to like AI and complications around traditional Hollywood. And you have to remember, this is taking place, minutes away from traditional Hollywood. So there was a little bit of a morale boost, let me say, from the C400 coming out, because people are looking at the industry as a whole and thinking, ooh, these are kind of scary times. But to see, a huge manufacturer like Canon embracing, the industry with a great cinema body like this was a bit of a morale boost, I'm being honest.
Well, for me, as mostly a Sony user, I have to say I'm just impressed. Like honestly, there's nothing that comes even close. I mean, let's talk just briefly about the specs. You already said it's like $8,000. So, I mean, what does $8,000 buy us for a Sony camera, right? I mean, I think you're around FX7 territory, which is 4K recording, which doesn't do RAW internal. And then you have the C400 now, which does 6K up to 60p full frame.
RAW.
The RAW light, which is amazing.
Triple base ISO. That's one of the biggest features of this camera. Yeah, that means greater possibility to get cleaner images in different scenarios at the end of the day.
And talking about the comparison to the Sony thing, because the triple base ISO is going, like the third base ISO is 12,800, which is exactly what the FX6 and A7S III and FX3 and all those popular Sony cameras do. So they're right in that territory. And we haven't had a chance to test it yet, but like what we see from the few people who were able to test it yet is that it's on par in terms of light sensitivity, even though it records at a higher resolution at 6K. So that's kind of impressive. I mean, I wonder about the triple ISO, like when are we going to have every ISO in a camera is native? You know what I mean? It's like, I want 20 native ISOs and never worry about noise anymore.
No, but like, I think it's great, especially for cameras that don't have, in general, internal NDs. That means you can really play with different ISOs and as a base ISO when different lighting scenarios. But Graham, what really caught your attention? The 6K, the RAW recording, the triple ISO. What was like the main point when you talked to the Canon people? What they were impressed with, and what were you impressed with?
I mean, the interview, which I think is on the site now, is about 15 or so minutes, and we go right at all the specs: 4K, 120, slow mo. I mean, multiple flavors of Canon RAW, kind of from HQ to, the lower side of RAW, built-in Wi-Fi functionality, and it's a cube now, which is interesting. We haven't had a Canon camera that's sort of, it's a literal cube. It reminds me of like a Komodo, maybe, body style. So yeah, tons of interesting specs.
So it's a Canon now.
What?
Also RF mount.
Of course. We almost like, yeah.
Well, is it the second lineup, like a second camera in the cinema lineup that has an RF mount after the R5C, right? I mean, because that's the biggest, if you look at the specs of the
C70 also.
Really? Oh, is it?
Yeah. I always adapt it to EF, but yeah, it is.
Okay. So, but in terms of specs, correct me if I'm wrong, it's very similar actually to the C500 Mark II, right? In terms of what it can do.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if we're just comparing it head to head to the C500 Mark II, obviously it does, the C500 Mark II doesn't have the triple base ISO. The autofocus functionality in the C400 is improved versus the C500 Mark II. C500 Mark II has better anamorphic capabilities. You can use more of the sensor. Not so with the C400. You're stuck to sort of 16:9. And the C500 Mark II has 2 CF Express Type B slots and an SD.
Nice.
Balloons out here. And then the C400 only has 1 CF Express Type B and 1 SD slot. So we're just kind of going head to head with those 2 cameras.
Just quickly, because we're talking about the sensor, we know already, and many people are asking if there is an open gate function in this camera. And if not, you said something now about comparing the 16:9 sensor of the 500 Mark II and this one. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, no, there's no open gate mode in the C400. The C500 Mark II has a open gate mode in it. Better for anamorphic.
Okay.
The C500. Yeah.
Which is funny because if you look at, because I mentioned earlier, what Sony camera can you compare it to? And it's probably the Burano because, I mean, the Burano has a 17:9, well, actually 3:2 sensor, but they don't allow open gate still, even though, and we reported about this, they finally gave us a firmware update roadmap, which is basically adding D-squeeze options for anamorphic D-squeeze, but not really giving an open gate capture. Other than that, there's a light raw codec in that camera too, like with the C400, but for a lot more money. I mean, we're talking about $25,000. So it's almost like there's a huge gap opening up now in between the two manufacturers, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, do you think they're after the Burano, the Canon people with this camera?
Well, look, that's all the chatter online, and I don't think that's misplaced. That's everyone said Burano compared to the C400. I mean, that is what everybody thought. Yeah, I mean, this is, as we always say, this is a camera, the C400, that it's like, I need to get it out. We need to get some lab tests going. We need to get it out in the field. You know what I mean? Because this is all sort of manufacturer provided specs at this point, and I just need to put it, through the paces.
Sure. Graham, I have a bit of concern. This camera only has an LCD. That's really not built for me personally. No EVF. Why? What's going on?
Yeah, so it isn't compatible with the Canon V70. I think I'm getting that right for the product name. So the V70 EVF from Canon might be one of my favorite EVFs of all time. It did start, at least, in a very expensive, I think, price point. I want to say the V70 started at maybe $4,000, only worked with Canon cameras. However, OLED, absolutely gorgeous. Does not work with the C400, however, because the C400 uses a USB-C cable for the LCD to the camera. And it also uses a USB-C cable for the hand grip. And it also uses a slightly different battery. So we have to be careful here. It's not fully backward compatible with the cameras living on both sides, backwards and frontwards compatible with the cameras living on both sides of it. But back to the EVF question, there's options from Zacuto that pop to mind, but no, only third party at this point. But at NAB, wasn't there a USB-C from Kinefinity? Maybe that could play well.
This?
I don't know.
No, there was not from Kinefinity. The Kinefinity one was actually SDI, but we had one from Blackmagic Design, the Ursa Cine EVF. And in the interview, we'll put the link in the show notes. They actually told us that they are not restricting it, because the question we asked, like, can you use it with a different camera? Like, do you have to use it with a Blackmagic camera? And they said, well, it's actually DisplayPort via USB-C, so any camera that supports that can use it. At that time, we were not aware of any camera that actually outputs image through USB-C, and now we have one. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I'll just say, if it doesn't work, there's going to be a lot of demand for Blackmagic Design to fix that, I guess, with a firmware update. But we'll hope to be able to test this as well, because of course it would be a perfect fit, and it's affordable. I mean, it's like $1,700. So that's like a no-brainer to buy for that camera in a way. Yeah.
And the USB-C cables are locking too. I should mention that, because your EVF, well, that doesn't exist, or the LCD being pulled out mid-shot would be a real bummer.
Well, I just want to go back to the recording media again. I'm always a little bit confused when there is a camera that supports two different types of cards. I wonder, like, why? Like, why can't we just have two CF Express Type B cards or two SD cards? Because in practice, it always means, like, on set, you just have to carry two different types of cards, and I don't know why. I mean, why wouldn't you want to have two CF Express Type B cards? Is there any?
I think, from my understanding, not everybody needs to shoot on this kind of higher spec or higher speed, bitrate, whatever, and not everybody want to invest on a CF Express card. Although we're gonna have a.
Well, actually, they are not expensive anymore, right? You can.
What is expensive, Nino? It's all relative.
Well, if you spend $8,000 on a camera, you can spend $200 on a 1 terabyte CF Express Type B card. Ideally, the one that is CineD branded, which is going to come out soon. But that's a different story.
Are we going to have a...
What an organic plug.
What an organic plug. Yeah, but in any case, honestly, I think that the thought process behind it is probably they want to give people who are only recording in those, actually the C400 that we didn't mention, is introducing two new compressed codecs, right? Which is one is H.265 based and one is H.264 based. But those two can be recorded onto the SD card. And the thought process of the manufacturer is probably, well, the card is cheaper, but honestly, I mean, like if you spend 8,000 on a camera, you can spend 200 on a second CF Express Type B card.
Yes, but don't forget that many of the laptops or desktops, whatever, do have a SD card input and not CF Express. That means if you're doing news, for example, and you need a very fast turnover, you simply finish on the appropriate codec, you give the card to your editor, and it's done. Yeah. So I think for me it works quite well. It's for greater flexibility. I actually like the idea of different cards, but
well, it's a camera that's also very well suited for live stuff. I think in terms of connectivity, it adds it's 12G SDI, but also Ethernet, and I think it has some kind of new, I don't know, I'm not that much into live stuff, but I know there is like this live standard that they're now supporting through Ethernet, really image through Ethernet. But
and
Genlock,
of course, is recording return, things like that, very live.
Yeah. But it also means that you're recording camera as well as a backup always, and you generally those live things or multicam things are longer events, whether it's a concert or whatever it is. And that generally means it's useful to have two card slots, identical card slots, because then there can be like you can continuous recording. It almost feels like an unnecessary omission for me. But
I haven't seen any complaint about it in the comments. And I think it's different working styles. Graham, for you, two identical cards or one each? What is better? What is suiting your needs better?
Well, I mean, the 512 gigabytes, without naming the manufacturer, that I purchased 9 of back in the day were like $599. They're now like $170. So yes, as Nino alluded to, CF Express Type B in a very affordable place, at least for me now. But I asked Canon why not 2 CF Express plus an SD slot like they have on the cameras on both sides of them. And it was a purely space consideration. They removed one CF Express slot just to keep the camera more compact. That doesn't really answer your question, why not 2 CF Express? But I guess they're just looking at the overall state of the market. I'm sure they talk to many memory manufacturers, and they're like, we're selling SD cards all the time. And maybe that was part of their consideration.
But Graham, what can you tell us about those new codecs that they introduced? Why even new codecs? Why do you think it's necessary, and what purpose do they have?
Do you mean the proxy?
Well, they have they introduced XFHEVCS and also XFAVCS. It's an intra-frame codec, and I think one is based in H.265 and one H.264. I mean, they're not necessarily only for proxies.
No, and they're also like MP4 wrappers still, so it's a little unclear to me how much cooler they are compared to sort of the other proxy options. Yeah, and you alluded to it right there. Like everyone's definition of proxy is different, right? Like this file might be totally usable for a social media team, for example, to be posting. And I mean, SD cards on the C400 can also handle XF AVC files as well. What they can't do, though, is cinema raw light. And Canon is very clear that the SD cards can't handle that part. And, you're right. If you're doing multicam and you're going to some kind of deck, then you're recording, that way as well. Yeah, it's...
and high speed. I mean, if you go to some of the high speeds are not available in Cinema Light Raw. So basically, I think you can go up to 180p with a cropped... like a 2K resolution, which is pretty amazing. Like 180p is something quite rare in any normal camera, I would say. And of course, I mean, I think it does 120p full res 422 10-bit DCI, which is great. No crop.
It's a full spec camera. I mean, it looks like a very nice working tool. Graham, bottom line, will you buy this camera for your own? You said you have 7 bodies. Is that going to be the 8th?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So I was like, all right, I think I should maybe sell, say, one of my C300 Mark IIIs. And then I'm kind of burying the lead here for something we'll talk about in a bit. I read all about the firmware update for my now a couple-year-old C300 Mark III, which just suggests, wait, why would I sell a thing that Canon is actively supporting with firmware? So the answer is no. I'm not sure if the C400 replaces any of my current camera lineup, but I'm definitely pre-ordering it. So that is an answer of a kind. I'm going to buy it, and I don't know if I'm getting rid of any of my other ones.
So what are you gaining with the firmware updates in those cameras, especially in the C300 Mark II, Mark III, but maybe also you want to mention the other ones?
Yeah, so I mean, the big, some of it's like quality of life improvements, like the little, focus tool that looks a little like a robot now samples like a larger area of the screen, things like that. Yay. But I mean, the different flavors of RAW coming to have already arrived at my C500 Mark II. Again, it's that RAW HQ, RAW ST, RAW LT. Those already came for the C500 Mark II. Now they're arriving for the C300 Mark III. So I have those different flavors of RAW where previously I didn't have those anymore. And that's more codecs options, more RAW options rather being added to my cameras years after I purchased them, which is pretty cool.
Graham, just one last question regarding the Canon stuff. In general, I have a feeling here in Europe, at least, the Canon in the cinema series lost a lot of ground to Sony over the last almost 10 years. Whereas the first, of course, with the original 5D Mark II, but then also the first cinema camera that came out was the C300. I mean, after the, what was it called? The Panasonic, the duck camera. The Micro Four Thirds AF101? AF101?
Yeah,
Remember?
something like this.
Yeah, but then after that, I mean, the first Super 35 cinema camera that was kind of affordable was the original Canon C300, which was around 15,000 euros at the time, which I bought. And I was very happy about that purchase because everybody was saying in the beginning it's way too expensive. It gave you only compressed codecs, and I think it was only 8-bit. But it was an amazing, no, it was 10-bit actually, but it was an amazing camera. And it actually, I used that thing. I mean, it's still sitting here somewhere on a shelf and with a broken XLR and a broken viewfinder. But I got a lot of great jobs out of this. And actually, a lot of people wanted to rent it because none of the rental houses believed in it. But what ended up happening, there were so many requests for people who wanted it. And then they lost me and many others when there wasn't an update to that camera for years. I mean, we were waiting for a new generation. And then Sony came out with the FS7, which was literally half price. I mean, it is a similar thing that I think Canon is trying right now.
The revenge.
It's actually like, it feels like it because I think I paid something like 7,000 or 8,000 for the first FS7. And I think when Sony realized how successful it was, they actually raised the price. But in the beginning, it was really half price of the original price of the C300. And then it still took Canon, I think, 2 years to come out with the Mark II. By that time, they had already lost a lot of people to Sony. And it feels like, at least here in Europe, that's what happened. I mean, like now everybody, if you're working in broadcast and you want to have cinematic look, it's almost like standard that you're almost required to shoot on a Sony. Now it's FX6 actually that's dominant and a little bit the FX9. But how is that in the US? I always felt like Canon has a bit of a bigger foothold still there, right?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I felt the exact thing that you did, that, Sony started to kind of, get ahead in the sort of rat race of it all. But Canon was always, and is still very dominant. If you look at, say, the Sundance shot on documentary categories, always very heavy Canon use. Unlike, if we're just picking a random film, a respected film festival, and the documentary categories, still very heavily Canon. But yeah, I was looking at the Burano and kind of thinking, what about me though? That being said, I was still taking my Canon bodies, to the Philippines and the jungle and and it was just, they were working great the whole time. Like they never skipped a beat. That being said, this does feel like a little bit of a love letter from Canon. It's like, we saw you, we were working on this, $8,000, here you go, to Canon shooters that have been sort of hanging on. So absolutely, it's hard to put a percentage on it, but yes, Sony has definitely edged out Canon in, say, the overall like doc reality market in North America. I think that's absolutely fair to say. Let us know in the comments if you disagree with that. But yeah, I was feeling the same thing.
Well, I always felt Canon used to be, like always be a little bit behind on the high frame rate stuff. Like there was always crop when you did a 120p on any of those Cinema EOS cameras, which is all a little bit frustrating. And now, I mean, it's amazing. And well, the other thing, I think they have one big disadvantage, which is their limited lens selection in the RF mount, which is still, if you compare it to what's available for E-mount, also from third-party manufacturers, it's just, I mean, it's incredible. It's changing. Finally, we have Sigma and Tamron apparently being licensed to do RF lenses, which only recently started.
But also Canon themselves, they have a solid roadmap, and the 35mm that was just announced. We'll talk about this in a second.
Well, the lenses are great, but I'm just saying they're very expensive if you compare them. I mean, there's hardly any budget options on RF mount as opposed to E-mount, which I think is a big consideration for a lot of people. Of course, you're limited in the selection. It's changing, but I think it's a very good move for them to open up to Sigma because, yeah.
We should be clear here. They opened it up for crop sensor support from third-party manufacturers. So there's no like full frame. Yeah. So let's be careful about that. And that is a whole can of worms that I have no inside knowledge on, but it seems fairly clear to me, at least, that there's a business decision going on here where Canon's like, you may have crop sensor lenses, third-party manufacturers, but not full frame coverage. We will keep that for ourselves. I don't know that for sure. That's a guess.
That's frustrating. I mean, we know that all those camera manufacturers have the biggest margins on lenses, right? I mean, that's where they make most of the money from the photo cinema market. I mean, I think a camera body alone, there's so much R&D in there, it's very hard to make money. So I guess that's what they want to protect. But honestly, if they're caring about market share, I think they should open that up.
It's a valid question for Yamaki-san, the owner and CEO of Sigma, whom you're going to meet just in 2 days' time during CineD. You can ask if there's any plans for full frame RF mount lenses, and see what he will answer.
See how diplomatically you will say that he's not allowed to do that.
Yeah, I will absolutely ask, but right now here I'll guess. We can watch the interview and see if it's right. But the answer is, I'm sure they're in the middle of ongoing negotiations to do exactly this thing, and they probably don't want to talk about it, which is fair. I understand that too.
Good, Nino. Let's move on.
Move on to the next camera.
I want to move to the next camera because at the end of the day, end of the night, Graham also needs to sleep a little bit before he starts running around with CineGear initiatives. So the next camera is from Panasonic, and we are talking about the LUMIX GH7, which is a bit of a surprised move. I mean, the GH6 was in the market for only 2 years, I would say. In Japan, it's already discontinued.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but at least here in Europe and in the US, you can still buy it. And not only that, we will talk about a certain feature that you can license and buy the license for it and add it to the GH6 that was announced yesterday also. But in general, so you had an interview with the Panasonic guys, and you want to go through the specifications first, or you just want to say if you were impressed with the new camera?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, maybe just general high-level thoughts, and we can dive into it. First, I will disclose right off the bat, I was a GH5 owner, but since I've sort of fallen out of touch with Micro Four Thirds and Panasonic in general, not because I don't think the cameras are great, it's because I had other cameras. That being said, it's incredible to me what they're able to fit in a camera that's like that's like this big. And there's a lot of exciting things in here, like ProRes RAW and an attention to audio from a camera manufacturer, 32-bit float. You have to have a sort of adapter module mounted on top to do that. But we should have 32-bit float everywhere, as far as I'm concerned. And then 5.8K, sensor capable of open gate, lovely for anamorphic, tons of ProRes options, integrated camera to cloud, connect, to your internet source, send it to Adobe Frame.io, for example.
You get the balloons again.
Yeah.
So for people who are listening to this, we're like on a Google Meet call with Graham, and every now and then he puts his thumbs up when he really likes something. Balloons keep coming up, so very awkward.
Graham,
So awkward.
Graham, in our conversations with the different Japanese camera manufacturers, not more than once we are telling them the cameras, visually speaking, the picture quality coming off those sensors are so good. So in some ways, maybe not the only, but one of the ways to gain more followers and enhance the camera and explore new frontiers is actually with audio. There's so much still to do with audio, and I'm personally very happy to see that Panasonic is finally adopting this type of method. Even as we said, it's not. You still need to buy this adapter, this XLR adapter, which is a new version. It's not the older one. If you have the older one, you will not be able to enjoy the 32-bit float. But still, it's remarkable that you have this kind. I mean, in the talk that we had with Panasonic people, they said it's really funny. You look at the meters, the audio meters, and all you see is green. You don't have to worry anymore about yellow and red or all of that stuff. It's simply always, you can treat it nicely in post. Okay, so you write about and the camera watt is like 2,000, almost 2,000 euro. I mean, $, sorry. It's the same.
2,200,
yeah. Dollars. It's actually the same price of the GH6 when it came out, which is, by the way, with some manufacturers, it's not the same. People are complaining why new cameras are much more expensive than their predecessors, for example. And here they were able to keep the same price. And do you know why the body? I mean, it's a bit of an aging look. Why the body is the same, like the GH6?
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds about that. Mind A, I guess, is all the accessories still cool, and for me, that's meaningful. If I've invested, a lot of money into a cage and an SSD mount and all of these various things that I might want. B, I all the camera bodies, there's only a few manufacturers that have camera bodies out right now that I'm like, meh about. But this one, I guess maybe it feels a little bulkier, but, I also own a few Blackmagic cameras that I love the image out of, but that are not truly quote unquote pocket. So, I don't know if it's not broken, don't fix it. I also don't know how much the Panasonic GH community was sort of clamoring for an updated body. I would love to know that.
I'm sure, because for me, it's literally, I can only guess it's a matter of time. If I look at the time difference between the GH6 and the GH7, and we know it takes quite more time to design the body and so on, besides all the valid reasons that you said, like keeping the old accessories and so on, I think it's just a matter of time. They simply didn't have enough time to come up with a new body. That's my perspective of the whole thing.
Well, if you look at the specs, when we didn't really talk about the resolutions and codecs in depth yet, but I think people won't care because this thing is simply amazing what they packed into this. I have not seen any camera in that price range or even close that records up to 300 frames per second in HD.
So now imagine if this camera would look even nicer.
Yeah, of course. They did a box camera before. They can do that. They probably will do that again. But we have 16:9 Full HD with 240p with variable frame rate up to 300 frames per second. I mean, I've never actually seen anything like that. And of course, ProRes RAW internal recording, which is interesting because, we were talking before we started recording that we can't find any hint anywhere in any of the presentations if it's 12-bit. And there's only 10-bit mentioned anywhere, which is funny. So it seems to be like 10-bit video in a 12-bit wrapper with ProRes RAW.
We have to ask. It says everywhere it's 8-bit or 10-bit for the compressed codec or ProRes. But when it comes to the ProRes RAW internal recording, it doesn't mention.
Well, ProRes per se is usually a 12-bit container. So we just wonder if it's actually ending up being 12-bit internal, which would be great. And it's one of the very, very, very few cameras that actually is capable of recording ProRes RAW internally, which is interesting to say the least. Of course, we know of the RED patent for RAW recording. So we know that DJI has ProRes RAW recording in the Ronin 4D as an option, a paid option, and also in the Inspire 3 as a paid option. So the question for me is, well, and when the Ronin 4D came out, initially it was built in that ProRes RAW recording. Then they pulled it back and they reintroduced it as a paid option. Our guess is that they have to pay, like DJI has to pay a license fee to RED for that. Now, the question is, since RED was acquired by Nikon, maybe they are a little bit more open for that. Well, it's speculation, and now maybe they are licensing this out to Panasonic.
Those type of decisions are being made much before the whole acquisition happened. Yeah, saying that, I think in one of the podcasts, one of the RED owners said that they gave the license to many other camera manufacturers, and the only reason, if we don't see this, it means that the manufacturer decided not to implement it yet. So obviously,
true. Jared said that.
Yeah, and Panasonic, I guess they are very.
And I think Panasonic also licensed the Airy color signs. That's fairly clear.
That's the one more thing. That's the it's like in the good old Apple days. One more thing, and that's you want to talk a little bit about this new feature that Panasonic implemented before we go back to some of the specifications.
Yeah, so I need to understand it a little bit better. But so wait, it's Airy Log 3, right? Is exactly the yeah. Great.
That's right.
So their sort of argument for that was they look at the GH7 as a potential crash cam's kind of an ugly word, but you know what I mean? Something you can stick on the side of a helicopter and then cut with your Alexa Mini on X thing. And then if it falls off the helicopter, it's fine. But that's literally how they were sort of positioning it, which kind of undersells the camera as just a very usable camera for hybrid photo video shooters. But yeah, if you're able to intercut it with, Alexa cameras, I could see that being appealing. I, also understand that Airy often rental only products for Mini. So there's sort of an aspirational element to it. I mean, the Amira is certainly much more affordable. The Classic, of course, you can purchase. So there's that element to it. And I will say, I'm very happy to use a GH7 in this way to avoid never having to see an action cam shot in the middle of The Hobbit for several seconds, which annoyed the heck out of me. So there's a sequence in The Hobbit where they're all going, one of the Hobbit movies, where they're in the river. And for several seconds, it's cuts from incredible footage to action cam. And I think Peter Jackson wouldn't have had to do that if the GH7 was around back then. Well, and that really bugs me because it's clear it's a different camera.
What bugged me more about that movie is the 60p high frame rate stuff that they shot it on, which looks like a newscast, but that's a different story. But yeah, I mean, the crash cam thing is a good point. I mean, we know that a lot of cinematographers on bigger budget movies are actually using Blackmagic cameras for that, because the Blackmagic log is very similar to the ARRI C log C actually. It's Canon is C log and ARRI is log C, so it's similar to the ARRI log C and it's easy to grade. And I guess that's the market they want to tap into, and also in terms of how much the camera costs, like we mentioned, that $2,000 something is very similar to some of those less expensive Blackmagic cameras. We have
to mention that the license is like $199 or $200 if you want this ARRI Log C3, and we also have to mention that's not the latest, meaning the new Alexa 35 uses actually the Log C4.
Yeah, but that's only because their dynamic range requires that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm just saying it's not a limitation. You mentioned as the camera as a crash or drone cam.
Well, their framing of it. I mean, we'll see it in the interview. But when I talked to Sean from Panasonic, that was their framing.
Yeah, I'm more excited about the possibility about filming in this specific log picture profile, and then either use, because Ari has a big library of LUTs. I think it's like 78 or LUTs that you can actually use when you want to color things, or actually just create your own. But it will be very interesting to see, and you can also either record it like baked in, if you're not using, of course, the raw footage, the raw element of the camera. Otherwise, you can just have it as a simulation to see. That can be very nice. So let's see.
Yeah, very curious. I mean, very interesting to give a breath of new life into the 4/3.
And maybe the most important thing is that obviously Panasonic proved that with a bit of inspiration, you can still surprise us with positive news and move forward with something was completely not expected. And that's what I really like here.
I think in both cases, for Canon and Panasonic, I mean, it feels like they're not holding back. You know what I mean? They're not holding back any features. Canon in the past has been accused of sometimes holding back some features from some of their cameras. And this time it feels like they do as much as they can for both of those cameras, because probably they see like you said in the beginning, Graham, the position of the market. It's not easy for a lot of people. And, like a lot of people are thinking, like everybody basically was saying the Burano is $10,000 too expensive for what it is. And now you have a camera which is actually less expensive than everybody would have expected.
Yeah, and with Panasonic, I'm not aware of any Varicam coming soon. So obviously you can...
Exactly, they're not protecting anything higher.
They're not protecting anything on the higher side. And the only thing that's left to see, if they're full frame futuristic cameras, whenever those will come, imagine if they will have all those features, that will be great to see. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, real quick, Nino, though. I also like, though, the engineering idea that, okay, Arri has amazing color science. Let's introduce that in our product, not pretend our color science is the greatest, or whatever. I like that more. It's like some people do different things better. And then also one CF Express slot, one SD slot on the GH7.
Yeah. Well, let's not talk about that again.
But last point, just to emphasize that one of the main differences with the GH6 is, of course, the autofocus, because this one has the latest and the greatest that Panasonic currently has, and it's the same like the G9 II, which, by the way, I really wonder if the sensor is the same or not. But yeah, that's something that we will have to maybe deep dive with Panasonic and ask them, because they're right, it's a new sensor. When I see the specifications, I really wonder. It's also developing a completely new sensor is always very costly, and it makes sense if it's a newer generation of micro four third cameras, to use maybe the same sensor. But this is something that we will have to verify.
Should we move back to some other Canon announcements? First, the Canon RF35 f1.4L VCM lens, a hybrid fixed focal length. What can you tell us about this one, Graham?
Yeah, so, correct me if I'm wrong out there in the comments, but RF, some gaps in the focal range, I should say, at least on the sort of photography side. I'm making a distinction from the cinema primes. I know they had an 85, they had a 50, I think they had 100. And when you're looking at 85 and 50, the thing missing is a 35. So this sort of completes the big trio that everyone loves as photographers. And detachable rear filter holder, which is great. And Nino, you mentioned it a little earlier. Pricey. RF just a little bit pricey. There it is. 1,499. So that's US dollars. 1,499. So, but pricey.
But it's a good, it's a hybrid lens. So it means like they literally thought about this also for video shooters, where very often when you talk about those, whether it's Sony E-mount or Canon RF, they sell a lot more to photographers, let's face it. So any of those video things are usually an afterthought. And I think it's changing slowly for a lot of those manufacturers, because they see that the video market is, I guess, growing. I don't know. But anyway, so hybrid, what does mean hybrid in this case? Well, it doesn't have hard stops for focus. Well, that's, that's something we have to point out. It's not a cinema lens like with a manual focus gear. There are no, pitch gears on there or anything like that. But it has an aperture ring built into the lens. And it has improved focus breathing. I guess when they say improved, it means there's still some focus breathing, but it must be more controlled. So those are the two things that are making it a little bit more hybrid, I guess.
Yeah.
1.2 pounds, pretty small too.
Pretty small. The minimum focus distance is quite good. It's funny, we're talking different measurement languages. Yeah, I'll say 28 millimeter, and you will say, I guess, 11.0 inch or something.
We have to say both anyway. It's hard to put subtitles in an audio podcast. Yeah,
but it's a fast lens. It's 1.4. And actually, I think you told me, no, that Canon is really proud having this lens. They were really excited having it and presenting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's all new optical design, 11 aperture blades, and it looks very cool. It also has one of those custom buttons on the side, which I like mapping to all sorts of various things. So, yeah, 67 millimeter front filter.
Sorry. Remember the announcement that Sony made, I think it was with the FX9, where they said they have these cinema lens series that never saw the light of day? They never released them. I
think there were a couple of those out.
They never came out. Like they were never actually sold. But this looked more like a cinema lens, with built-in autofocus, and this is more like a photo lens with kind of some video capabilities. But it's both. In both cases, they called it hybrid lenses. But for some reason, Sony never released them because they were also quite expensive when they announced them, and I don't know. But it's interesting. So you see that manufacturers are aware that there should be lenses that work on both fields, but so far I've never seen a lens that isn't a compromise on one of the two sides, right? And usually the compromise has to be made on the video side, because what we really would want to have is a lens with hard focus stops and maybe like at least 270 degrees of barrel movement with hard stops, and then still be able to have autofocus built in. If anybody manages to do that, that's amazing. Yeah.
Graham.
Yeah, I'm
Last
ready.
question about this lens. What is VCM? Do you know, or I'm happy to talk a little bit about this.
Voice. Yeah. I don't remember. To me, it seemed like a sort of nebulous sort of engineering idea that, great.
Yeah, no, but it's a new motor that they implemented to drive the focus, the elements inside. And one thing to remember, and that's actually came out very clear in the presentation, when there is no power, like when the lens is not connected or there is no power, it might rattle a little bit. There might be some noise within the camera, but in the lens, sorry. But they said not to be worried. It's somehow cushioned inside, and nothing will happen. But people should be aware that there will be some noise to this lens, so not to rush and give it back and say, hey, it's defected or anything. No, it's not. It just needs power in order for the motor to be able to drive the focus.
All right.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the other lens, which is a very different lens that they announced? Well, actually, we've had the Cine-Servo 17-120 for 10 years now. That's an amazing lens. That's a lens that I love to use on documentaries sometimes. It's big, but it's also great servo zoom with a perfect range. 17-120 literally means it can be like an all-day lens. It is not, it's T2.95 to 3.9, but it loses only at the end, if I recall correctly, at least the original one. So you would only literally lose a stop or 1.5 stops at the very end of that focal range. Other than that, the irony of that is that lens worked best on Sony cameras for me, because any of those cinema cameras from Canon so far didn't have the high-res connector built into the camera. So I think you needed, you will know better, Graham, but you needed like an accessory, right, to use any of those lenses.
I used a D-tap kind of thing.
Which is funny because like as a Canon lens, a Canon camera, and then you cannot really attach it without an accessory. but it worked really well on the Sony cameras, and I've used that thing a lot, and it's amazing. And now finally, the new thing is they came out with an RF mount version. You
were just complaining about lack of lenses. They heard you. They came with a lens. Huh? Look how fast.
Kind of. But it's I wouldn't.
It's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. It's a very expensive lens. It's $24,000. But it is definitely like a workhorse lens that will make a full frame cinema camera. Is it full frame actually? Yeah, it is full frame.
It's Super 35.
Oh, it's Super 35. Yeah, like the original. But it will make a Super 35 camera actually make into a proper like traditional broadcast camera in a way, like a PXW from Sony or something like that, because you literally get the same range, but on a large sensor, at least Super 35 sensor, if not full frame. But I think they also enhanced something in there's also a new motor inside, right?
Yeah.
And the servo drive unit has been improved. And yeah, it also this updated version is also available in PL mount. And I was trying to sort of call it a version 2 in PL, and they didn't seem to want to do that, which suggests that, the dimensions and the weight, very similar to the one you and I have used a lot, Nino. So it's, it's not, I wanted obviously like RF mount. Okay. Like I want half the size, but still 17 to 120 T295, but we don't really get that. We get upgrades, but it's not like a much tinier version of the 17 to 120.
Well, if there's one issue I had with the lens, and I'm curious if you had that too, it's like when you do like a little creep zoom, and I know a lot of those servo zooms have that problem. It kind of does a little jump at the very beginning, like the second you. And this lens did it better than most of the others, but it still had it. So I wonder if that was something that was enhanced.
I also, I would like to give that a shot, because I also wondered if that's just because I only use this lens, the previous version, in like heavy broadcast rental environments where I always thought maybe the motor had just been used as a football before I got it, which speaks to the fact that these things are just like tanks and they last for years and years and years, offsetting that, price tag that you mentioned earlier. So, and then also supporting, metadata output, which the other version of it didn't do.
That's
for me.
One of the key features, actually.
Yeah. Well, I would still, like if I were in the market for something like this, I would still look at the PL version just as a little recommendation, because of course you're a lot more flexible. You can put that on any camera. The RF will limit you to Canon cameras, and I don't really see the upside of having the RF version, other than it's probably a couple centimeters shorter because of the mount. But there is not really...
Yeah, we're talking centimeters though. So like,
it's like
very, very tiny.
What else is there? Like it doesn't. I mean, you have what is it? Is there autofocus? Is there autofocus?
No autofocus,
right? So I don't know what the upside would be to buy the RF version, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, also this might be a good place to talk about that Canon has a new RF to PL adapter that Canon has made, which is coming out. And interestingly, I just noticed that yesterday, the PL adapter for the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II went on sale 50% off. So check that out on B&H.
I think we even reported about this. Like it was one of our special. I don't know if it was the deal zone, but we have to check. Anyway.
All right. Should we move on from Canon
please.
and Panasonic? So there was another announcement. Well, there are a lot of announcements in a couple of days, like as usual before a big trade show. But there's a new Sigma 28 to 45 f1.8 DN Art zoom lens. Now, Graham, I hope you can tell us a little bit about it, with a little caveat that you are a Sigma ambassador. So anything we hear from you now, people have to take with a little bit of grain of thoughts, because everything will be amazing that you talk about. No, just kidding. But you are a Sigma ambassador. So yeah, just people keep that in mind.
Good disclosure. No, it's a good disclosure. I don't know how they did it. F1.8, 28 to 45 millimeter. So it's really, the full frame version of the 18 to 35, which is so popular. It's a bit of a meme. Have you seen any of these memes where it's like, oh, I can't pick a lens, I'm going to get an 18 to 35? I see them on the Komodo forums all the time. And I'm like, all right, well, yeah, it's a meme because it's great. it's an internal zooming mechanism. So dimensions wise, it is a little bit longer, but it's only 2.2 pounds. So it was interesting seeing comments online, when it's connected to like an L mount Sigma FP, it looks large, but it gets to like here, it's not a huge zoom. And, I've heard some comments, people being like, could the focal, range have been longer? I've heard some comments around that, but then, yeah, there's a trade-off there. Not being a optical engineer, I would assume then you're getting a much larger overall lens. So, but that f1.8, I gotta say, in a zoom, for me, it's the perfect, like, you're unclear what you're walking into and you need a B-roll lens. You know what I mean? When you can't just swap a bunch of primes and you're just wandering into something and you just don't know how the action is going to go. For that, really, really great focal range. And a world's first autofocus, full frame coverage, f1.8. So that's kind of exciting.
Well, and also for me, always those lenses like the 1835 are perfect for interview. I mean, they're a little bit too short sometimes, but if for the wider angle of an interview, it's amazing to have to be able to change the perspective a little bit, the field of view in between, like with questions, and still have a full frame look, kind of. Have you actually used did you have a chance to work with a 28 to 45 yet, the new one?
Yes, I have had it for some weeks now, and I've used it in L mount, not the E mount version. I should mention, only available in L and E mount, and I've used it on the Blackmagic 6K L mount and the Ronin 4D. There was a lot of questions about balancing on the Ronin 4D. Even with the counterweight, you can't really engage that fourth axis perfectly. So I was using the other three axes to use that lens with, and still, looked great. But yeah, I was only using the L mount version for the past few weeks here, helping with the launch in North America.
Is it heavy? Like, is it significantly more heavy than the 1835?
Well, it's 2.2 pounds, so I'll let you decide. Everyone's definition of heavy is, but I think someone commented the other day, "Oh, that's very heavy," and I'm like, gyms don't even have 2.2 pound weights. Like, I was hand-holding with it the entire day on the Blackmagic 6K.
To be fair, Sigma lenses are not known to be light, but that's because they put in amazing glass. I mean, literally, the art series in general is a bit more on the heavy side, but I think for a good reason, because they just
the art side. Yeah, but I mean, if you look at contemporary sort of I series, they're like this big.
Small, but this is an art one, I think. Okay, so and pricing, of course, is very competitive as usual with Sigma lenses. We're talking about $1,350 for that lens. So this will be a popular choice for a lot of people. I mean, it is, of course, starting at 28 millimeters, which is, it's probably not wide enough to be your standard zoom, like you're always on.
For me,
zoom.
it's a bit lacking here, but as Graham mentioned, the blanket is very small at the end between the size and the focal length. It's all really per millimeters. Yeah, you want a little bit here, you lose there, or the size or weight or even focal length on the end side. But I wish it would have been a bit wider, of course.
All right. Before we let Graham go, let's touch on a couple more smaller subjects. Smaller, I don't know. Well, while we're talking to somebody in Hollywood, maybe we should mention that the Sony Pictures...
It's a palm tree right here.
There's a palm tree, right? That's like, I think it's all fake. You're probably in the next room. Just bragging to people. Well, anyway. No. So Sony Pictures CEO publicly said in an interview that Sony wants to leverage AI in film production to cut costs, and he was very specific about that. So what's your thoughts on this, Graham?
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we need to be realistic that this is a business and that any possible way to make it financially viable for all participants in said business will be pursued. That being said, a lot of the unions are trying to put guardrails in place about what exactly can be used when it comes to AI. I think when publicly speaking about AI, studio heads in general might be behooved in speaking about it as a way to reduce pain points for creatives on their team versus, for example, sort of saving their bottom line, because the one of the reasons there were there was a strike recently, multiple unions striking, is because creatives felt like they weren't being listened to and they were sort of being, driven over in the overall process. And these kinds of comments about artificial intelligence are not going to help that debate. That being said, for example, in VFX, rotoscoping frame by frame a thing is very hard, time consuming, and awful. Animating a character moving one frame at a time, you can't see, but I'm moving my hand slowly like a mannequin or something, frame by frame, awful work. If we can take away some of this sort of, I don't want to use the term busy work, so lay into me in the comments if you hate that, but the pain points for VFX artists, for example, if we can remove some of those, fine. And that will save Sony money 100%. I'm off my soapbox.
Yeah, good point. I don't think he's actually talking to creatives, like when he makes a
No, I know he's
like
not.
that.
He should be.
Well, the reality is those people are talking to shareholders, right? They want to appease to shareholders, and they want to. If you look at like we have a graph on the article which actually shows the total theatrical market, and we see how it completely collapsed when COVID hit at the beginning of 2020, and then it's only. I mean, we're not even close to where it was 2019. I mean, we're still 10 billion. I mean, the whole market has a size of what, 30, what is it now? 31 billion. It was 42 billion in 2019. And they are forecasting that it will only get close to where it was in 2019 in 27. So we're talking probably about 10 years of kind of recovery. And of course, not everything has to do with COVID, but of course, we know that COVID kind of like spurred the development of the streaming services, and their dominance just increased. But long story short, they lost a lot of money, like they lost profits, and now they are trying to recoup them. And when he's talking like that, I think he's talking to shareholders and not to creatives. He doesn't care, honestly, about the creatives, probably. Because he knows like
right though, but we make all of his shows, television, films, movies.
Absolutely.
And what sells tickets? Movie stars, and movie stars also hear this. So,
yeah, no, fair. Yeah, absolutely. But that's it's unfortunate that I think this whole market, like this whole discussion, is too dominated by those tech giants. And I think we have to reclaim that back as creatives. And that's, it's great that the reunions are actually, getting out the pitchforks, because I think we need to. I mean, we simply have to, because, I mean, the funny thing is that at some point, those things have to feed on our creative work, on everybody's creative works. And if there's no fresh creative works anymore, it's going to be like, we mentioned this in another podcast, like the snake is going to bite its own tail. It's like AI is going to generate stuff out of other AI stuff, and it's gonna worsen. But anyway, I mean, it's a bit scary what's happening here.
I mean, I think about it a little like there was this debate in video games a few years back, and the debate was, can games make you cry? Okay, bear with me. There's a segue here, I swear. Can games make you cry? Okay, interesting. So if you can feel emotion from video games, that sort of elevates that art form. Okay, interesting. A couple games to date, I think, have allowed people to feel that level of emotion. How many years do you think it will take before AI pens a script, develops it, creates a film out of it, where we don't get this weird sort of uncanny valley feeling from watching it, that we look at these like actual human beings interacting with one another? I still think we're a long way from that. I'm not talking about a beautiful shot of a hot air balloon. I'm talking about people in a conversation, exploring, humanity one-on-one with an Oscar-worthy performance from an AI-generated person. I don't know if we're ever going to get there, to be honest. And that gives me a little bit of.
I have an idea for an art project. Let's make an AI that is a generative executive. You know what I mean? It's like somebody, like an AI that replaces the executives. And then let's see what happens, right?
Well, famously, all the studio heads in town around me here use a lot of analytics, right? So they place X person in X movie opposite X person, and they're like 100 million domestically. rarely does that work. So they've tried doing like purely data-driven creativity, and that hasn't worked out too well.
Nino, what is the second subject?
Second subject in terms of AI. Well, we have a little opinion piece here on by our dear writer Omri. It came out like a couple of weeks ago already that Sora was actually needing help in post-production, whereas they claimed in the beginning that it was all AI generated, which of course, it was, but there's a lot of human input here that actually influence those results. So I don't think it doesn't come as a surprise, but it's kind of, like putting everything a little bit into perspective, because we know that the randomness of those AI generated images is still a big thing. And this will be something that actually is helping us creatives in a sense that, it's not possible yet, at least, to make a full movie out of completely generated images, simply because it's not even possible to have the same character in every shot. And even if it tries, it looks different every time. And yeah, it just came out that this was not all made by AI and then just taken as it came out and just put online. There were modifications made. So in the end, there were creatives making some decisions on how that thing looked like, and then they made it sound like it is all AI generated. So yeah, anyway.
Good.
Seems a bit like deception.
It is. I think it is. I mean, it's like, there's a lot of experiment. I mean, there's a lot of things actually which are very questionable about OpenAI. There was an interview that came out a couple of days ago from one of the former board members, and she talked a lot about how deceptive Sam Altman was internally in the company in terms of a lot of things. So, then we had this whole issue with the Scarlett Johansson's voice a couple of weeks ago. So, everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. Just because you're talking in a soft voice and make everybody feel very, we are going to be very easy with AI and we're very secure, safe, and we're going to take care of everything, doesn't mean that you actually act that way. So let's see.
Yeah, Oppenheimer spoke in a soft voice as well.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. So I don't think, we're not worthy of panic yet. And I think, these types of AI innovations are going to help a lot of different industries. But let's just kind of be aware of it, like we're aware of every tool we use in technology, and just kind of watch its development and see how we can integrate it in a safe and ethical way in the work that we all do.
Absolutely. And I feel a kind of a fatigue setting in a way, like with those tools, like the generative stuff. And people seem to be more aware. Of course, I mean, they are getting better all the time, so it's harder to kind of find out what's made with them. But people are all much better trained than they were a year ago. So I think a lot more people actually realize its faults, and then the fatigue sets in and they are like, I don't want to see this. It's almost like if you look at comments on social media when somebody posts something that was generated with AI, I don't know. It almost feels like there's a tipping point coming where, something that looks great in the beginning is not looking so great for a lot of people anymore.
I just want to mention one more thing about this before we close down here. We're talking all the time about the visual side. We also published an article, actually, Masha, our writer, mentioned the audio side of things. And this is even more scary in a way, because there are some sites that are really generating the whole song, and it sounds simply amazing. And I have to say, we also did the CineD song. We talked about it last time. Imagine, like, I'm now looking, I need to do a video clip. Yeah. And I know that I'm restricted either with a real singer who sang a song. I'm putting it on the table here. Yeah. So I can't really use that song, or sometimes even the cover of it. Or I can literally record somebody who is maybe unknown, and maybe the music is not so nice. And the music samples that I heard, I mean, please just really check Masha's article. It's quite amazing. There's some samples over there which are really good. And of course, I'm asking myself, I mean, I can do a whole video clip now with music that I created. it sounds really nice. And I really wonder, I don't know how it goes with copyrights, if I let somebody stand and kind of do as if he or she are singing, and I have a music clip. You know what I mean? It's like rights wise or whatever, but it's
I was on an email with a 47 thread email with a bunch of lawyers about this actually a month ago now. But the place we ended, without talking anything about the project or what we were doing, is we were debating this. And so if you think about AI, it's a person, okay? And it looks at things and it takes the sum totality of every singer ever and creates a song based on that. But the debate is, it's looking at a large language learning model and creating, Johnny's tune. Fine. That is essentially what creativity is the other side of the debate. Johnny, Nino, and we look at everything from Rembrandt to shows we like, and we are creative based on that. Fine. But the issue is, at least on the legal side, at least currently, and at least with this subset of lawyers that I was speaking with, is because they couldn't determine where the AI was looking, what it was sampling, and what was the state of the copyright of that material, we couldn't use any of that. So I do think that's going to change, because if you say that AI is looking at a thing and creating a piece of creative content or directly stealing from, you see how the language is sort of different there. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, if you're not able to determine where it's taking the information from, it also means it will just end up being used, because there's a complete impossibility of somebody to prove that it was based on something existing, right? Like if one of those, and if you look at the article that Masha wrote, and she tested all different kinds of music generators. We started it with a CineD song, and she kind of like was inspired to test a lot more. She created a score, like a dark fantasy score, a dreamy song, different stuff with different generators. And just imagine one of those things to be ending up in a movie, and you don't credit it. Like, you don't say that it was, like you just say music creative or whatever, or music producer. How is anybody ever going to find out? That's the problem. And that's the reality. I think it's already creeping in all kinds of creative productions as we speak. It doesn't matter if it's generated images or audio. We just will not be able to determine it. And of course, it's a legal problem, but unfortunately, it's only a legal problem if you talk about it, which means like a lot of people will not talk about it. They will just do it. And like you said, Johnny, I think the difficult thing is, of course, the music industry is highly regulated. Like, if you want a song that you recognize, there's very clear that you have to pay royalties. And if you want a voice that, like a singer that everybody knows, this will cost you money. And then there's royalty-free tracks. And the problem with those is, of course, a lot of us, and I'm talking about, like I would say,
average production house,
production people, and even for broadcast, you end up using some stock music sometimes because you don't have time or budget to hire a composer. But so you
actually, everyone uses it too. If you can find little tracks in major motion pictures playing in the background, like everyone's using the same.
And then, but you always, by doing that, you have to make compromises, because you work with something that's kind of finished, right? If you're lucky, you get the stems, meaning you can kind of like fade in and fade out the different instruments, but that's it. You're stuck with what there is. And now you can, it's still kind of, like old
it's
text
amazing.
generated.
I went to the libraries, like 2 libraries over there, based on Masha's article, and I was blown away by what it can do.
Yeah.
And then I left with the question, what can I use it for?
Yeah.
Because tomorrow, if I want to review a camera and I need a specific music, calming, yoga stuff, that's the prompt line, and I get something, even with a full text, as we see, can I use it for the review?
Yeah. And sorry.
But Nino, you alluded to this earlier. You said, essentially, there's no risk as long as you don't talk about it. There's some risk because you used a tool that people made that has an algorithm that is sampling all of humanity. It's sampling iTunes. It's sampling YouTube. What is it sampling? So a programmer made that. You bought it. You used it. Whatever. So there's now 2 people in the chain that can create risk. and now you're putting it in a project, and who knows who's developing a thing to detect AI songs. And you know what I mean? So you can kind of see where suddenly there's a thread of somewhat, it could become a risky thing. That's all I'm saying.
We've talked about this in an earlier episode. I think for me, the only solution to this will be at some point there needs to be almost global regulation where those companies are required to show the sources of all of that stuff. So let's say you generate a song and then it literally needs to give you a list of all the things that kind of were quote unquote inspiration for that.
I hope they know.
Well, I'm just saying, like, and I think the point will be when some major production will be entirely AI produced, and it's going to be Netflix or Sony Pictures or whoever. They're going to release something that is from A to Z, image generated, maybe even the audio. I don't know, and then maybe there will be a huge outcry of the creative industry, and maybe we will be able to lobby them into doing something like that because it's something that will otherwise kill entire industries. The other thing we haven't actually reported about yet, but I think an article is in the works, is now we will also have auto-generated sound effects, which is of course very logical. That's the other thing, right? You're looking for Foley for any creative like video production. That's very hard to find. I mean, we all know that, we've been there, right? You're looking for steps. I need step sounds. Then you have like your, I don't know, couple dozen different steps on gravel, on concrete, on whatever, and you never find the exact one that you need, and it's always kind of sounding a little bit off. If there now is a AI that can generate exactly how you need it, of course you're going to use it, and that's already, I mean, there's a service now that has started which is going in that direction. So yeah, it's endless, and it's literally endless, and it's only gonna go forward. And I think it's not. The clock is ticking. I mean, we already passed the point where something should have been done legally, but it still needs to be done. Yeah. Well,
let's try to end this conversation on a positive note. Graham, sorry?
Oh, well, one thing we didn't mention yet, I don't know if that's so positive, but Tribeca Film Festival announced that they will screen the Sora shorts, like the AI-generated short films, as part of their film festival. With like for people who are not seeing Graham, he's it's like
my face is in my hands. Yeah. That's real, right? That's verified. Like it's that Tribeca's doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, there's going to be just a huge backlash.
There already is, That's what you wanted to end on a positive note, so I leave you.
Oh, is that
the positive note for me that I really need to pick up the keys from school. That's positive,
okay,
no?
That's good.
Well, that's a positive note.
That's a positive note.
Yeah.
And, well, actually, the positive note will be that you will be at CineGear over the next 2 days, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of great stuff. Unfortunately, this year, Johnny and I can't be there, but we're very, very grateful that you can. And I hope that maybe next week we can all talk again together about what you saw. And for everybody who's listening and watching, please, keep your eyes glued to the screen on CineD for a lot of videos that are going to be published over the next week from Graham, who's covering a lot of stuff from CineGear. And yeah.
Great. Graham, thank you very much for being with us. And we know it's really early morning for you by now. Sleep well, sleep tight. Talk to you soon. Nino, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. And
thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, watching. And don't forget to subscribe also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and give us a rating for the podcast. Thank you.